Hi, this is Mark Turmell. I was the project leader, designer, programmer on many of the original Midway arcade titles, Smash TV, NBA Jam, NFL Blitz. Today, I am the senior creative director for a studio inside Zynga, and I've been there for several years.
So Mark, talk about this little documentary you were involved with that's coming up, this Midway documentary. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, very close to my heart. Very excited about the project and what Josh put together. Midway was really, it was a special place. The amount of talent that studio kind of generated that has gone on to impact the business is really unprecedented. Of course, you have the Mortal Kombat franchise that continues to this day. But a lot of those titles back there in the late 80s, early 90s were really kind of seminal titles that still hold up well today.
Yeah, can you take us back to those days? I mean, arcade game design was much, much different than game design today, just in overall general. Can you talk about some of the differences when you were designing an arcade game compared to like game design, in 2020?
Well, yes and no. The coin-op business, of course, a player, we would try to get one quarter, one token at a time from the player. But when you look at the market today, in particular the free-to-play, mobile space, it's all about microtransactions. And so in the coin-op days, we tried to kind of wow people with some immediate upfront technology, visuals, excitement, to get that first quarter, that first, 2 or 3 minutes of play, a great package, a great cabinet. But then it relied on the quality of the game and, to have people stick to it. And that is very similar to today. You need to really wow people and intrigue people up front, but to have them stick around and, not, lapse from your game, delete your app from their device is very similar. So a lot of commonalities. Where it's really different, of course, is the size of the teams and the talent and the production that was required in today's business. A game like NBA Jam, Smash TV, I think we had about 5 or 6 people on the whole project. NBA Jam, not many more, 7 or 8 people. NFL Blitz, maybe we ended up with 12 people. Versus today, to release a kind of a leading a quality title that can actually survive and excel, you're talking 30, 40, 50 men or more, men and women, developers, to really get that game out the door. And you have experts in almost every field, not just modeling and, lighting, of course, engineering, audio, music, but even writing. So nowadays, you really need to hit the nail on the head in a lot of categories, starting with, great production.
I kind of want to get into your head. Obviously, NBA Jam was a 2D digital sprite game, and then NFL Blitz was 3D. As a game designer, what made you decide to go with that 3D route? I know it was there was a transitional period where everyone was going away from sprites and into 3D models, but there were a lot of companies that didn't want to do that or didn't think it was necessary, or thought it was just chasing the popular horse at the time. What were your thoughts on it personally?
Yeah, you're right. There was debate, in the studio at that time on, whether we should go down that path. There were performance risks, of course. Early 3D hardware, was not really FPS, effective. But even in the beginning with NBA Jam and the digitized graphics, we were all kind of geeking out at tech. And so when the 3DFX chip came out, we were able to integrate that chipset into our custom hardware. And so we were kind of geeking out on the tech. being able to put 3D objects onto the screen and kind of a new landscape for us to learn. And so it was more of a geeky tech, trying to be cutting edge that really drove the decision on Blitz to go 3D. And I'm certainly glad we did. I mean, we only had polygonal models there for that original Blitz of a few hundred polys, so it was very sharp and jaggedy. But the ability to move the camera, and we ended up, of course, running at 60 frames a second. It really, gave us a lot of opportunity to do special things with that camera work. So it was just fun. It was cutting edge.
Now, like with NBA Jam and NFL Blitz in particular, I've always described them as they're sports games for people who don't like sports games. I've never cared for sports games, but NBA Jam and NFL Blitz were two of the games I would play with my dad in the arcade because he was a big sports guy and I wasn't, but we could both enjoy these games because they were so arcadey. They were so easy to pick up and play and addictive to keep playing. Was that intentional when you were designing these games?
Oh yeah. I'm the same way. I am a sports fan, but I'm not a fan of like the simulators and kind of the minutia, the stats. And so for me, I'm all about kind of moment-to-moment gameplay with everything. Every game I've ever made is that moment-to-moment interaction and trying to be eye-popping. And so we set off immediately to make games that were, easy to pick up and play, over the top, breaking the rules. And so that was definitely the intent and the design. And you're right. I've had a lot of people have come up to me over the years or reached out that said, "Hey, I was never really a fan of, the NBA or the NFL, but then I kind of became a fan after, playing these games." And of course, it's silly to think that a video game could have an impact on the popularity of something as enormous as the NBA, but I think it actually did in some small degree. After all, it did make, $1 billion that first year, when it came out. All those supporters couldn't have been just pure NBA fans. And of course, the NBA was different back then too. 25 years ago, it isn't the juggernaut that it is today.
Yeah, more than one people could make sports games. It was a great time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to take you back to obviously the game released in '93. You were working on it prior to that, though. This was a time when consoles were starting to get more popular, more powerful. Yet your PlayStation, your N64. How did you view that as a game designer? Because obviously you're in the arcade business, and you start to see these consoles start to catch up to the technology that's in these giant machines.
Man, you are spot on with these questions, because there was a lot of angst and concern and drama inside Midway in that era about the consoles. And we felt that it was inevitable that the consoles would catch up to the hardware. We were always 60 frames per second. We made great hardware. We could really overpower what was on the screen compared to any console to date in those early 90s. And so when we looked at these consoles, we were running scared all the time, and it amped up our hardware engineering, efforts to try to stay ahead. But we knew it was just a matter of time before they would eclipse us. So it was very concerning, and it made us, it probably led us to do more of the crazy things just to get attention, because our ability to wow people with, "Hey, look at how much stuff is on the screen," started to diminish. And so that's why maybe we went for the over-the-top things, or the blood and the gore, things that you weren't really seeing on the console side. So it played into our lives all the time, that concern and that topic.
Our Arcade 1UP last year released an NBA Jam 4-player cabinet with NetPlay. It's so funny because someone like me who grew up in arcades, that speaks to me on a nostalgic level. Now you have all these people buying these arcade machines that are slightly smaller, but they're still arcade machines. Sure, you can play it on a computer or N64 or whatever, but they're choosing to spend $500 on these giant arcade machines. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love it. I I have one of those NBA jams. It's got hang time in it as well, tournament edition. And it's a lot of fun. The game still, especially hang time, I'm particularly fond of the gameplay in hang time. We have this kind of alley-oop, co-op mechanic. But the gameplay still holds up. And so you're right, there's a nostalgia factor, but I understand that they are selling like hotcakes. They'll sell more of those than we sold of the original coin-op titles. And that might be just through like the Costco's and Sam's Clubs. It's a big hit, so it's really fun to see.
I mean, that's got to feel good as a game designer to see, look at your game and go, hey, this is still good 20 years from now, because there are some games that have not aged well.
Yeah, exactly. I have a 12, a 10, and a 4-year-old myself, and so for them, of course, they're playing leading edge games, and so every once in a while I get to at least poke them a little bit and say, hey, look at this, and they give me a little shrug, but it feels good. You're right.
I mean, did you know when you were making these games, I don't think anyone really knows, but did you have a feeling that you were going to make these gigantic titanous games that were going to last for 30 years?
Well, certainly not. But when we, NBA Jam, Midway was in Chicago, of course, and we developed that game in about 10 months. At about the 8 or 9 month mark, we bring the games to local arcades. And we test them, of course, and look for bugs and look for feedback. I'd kind of hover back, behind the cabinet and kind of watch the action, and then go back and run back to work and fix things. Chicago was in the hoopla of the Michael Jordan era. And so NBA Jam was certainly crushing it there in Chicago. But there was actually a sneaking suspicion that the game was not going to do well outside of Chicago, and that it was really isolated to this Jordan craziness that was happening. And it was not until I actually flew out to Westwood, the UCLA campus, had a couple of test machines, one in an arcade down in Westwood, one on the campus. And when I sat back and watched, I saw the same, bedlam and screaming and, agitation that would happen with the players, except it was with the Lakers, not the Bulls. And so it really wasn't until that moment where I realized it was actually going to be big, around the country. And, we loved playing it. I spent a lot of time tuning and tweaking every little value. And I remember thinking, man, other games can't possibly compete with this kind of fun factor, because so much time we put into the little nuances that are happening. And it was similar with NFL Blitz. I knew NFL Blitz would be, strong across the country right off the bat. Once we got the camera going and, the first tackles. And of course, that game had so many over-the-top animations that were very entertaining. And so we knew that was going to resonate.
So it's so incredible to me to see that process of the development back in the 90s, because now you can just literally send code via digital space and someone can download it and play the game on their computer, right, to test it. But you had to physically ship cabinets to the location and fly there and then watch people play. I think it's incredible how far technology has come since then.
It's interesting though, the same, your question earlier about the differences between then and now. Nowadays games have they track a lot of stats. They look at all the button presses so that they can optimize the experience and understand, what paths players are taking or not taking. And in a similar regard, we have that same thing on NBA Jam, where there's a battery backed up CMOS RAM that is in those old coin-ops. And I could walk up to any coin-op game and I could jiggle the sticks in a certain way and press buttons in a certain way. I can still do it today, and actually pull up an audits page that looks at the battery backed up memory. So you can unplug it, plug it back in, it's still there. And so I can look at stats, the average game times, the average difference on the scoring, which teams are being selected, longest streaks, things like that are similar to today. We learn from looking at the data, but in regards to the actual hardware being shipped, the game would actually fit on a couple of EEPROMs. The code was kept on EEPROMs. And so we could burn 2 new EEPROMs and we could, run around to the arcades and update the games. And NFL Blitz was actually the first coin-op game that we released that used a hard drive. So that had hardware that, we could just send a new, $300 hard drive out to the different locations.
Now, how much space did that 3 of a hard drive carry at that time period?
Yeah, it was pretty small. It was like 20 megabytes.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So let's changing pace a bit. Obviously, NBA Jam is known. One of the things it's known for is the boom shakalaka, and he's on fire. Can you talk about how that came about, working with Tim and getting him involved in the project?
Yeah. Well, Tim Kitzrow is the VO talent that we used on both of those games. He was a local Chicago voiceover guy that the pinball machine developers would use. Midway was part of Williams Electronics, Midway, Bally, Atari. Eventually, we were all one company. And so I'd walk through the assembly line every night, kind of a side story, but a lot of pinball machines happening. And of course, voiceover and then pinball machines, Funhouse, a little laughter and things like that. And so it was natural that each of those games would pull in some talent for, maybe 5 or 10 words that would be, spoken. And so we did the same thing. We started, Smash TV had a few things with Mutoid Man and Total Carnage. Had some VO. Actually, Ed Boon did a lot of the VO on Total Carnage. And for NBA Jam, we knew that we, of course, had to call out the names of the players. So we did, like different inflections. Pippin. We did these. We knew we had some different things we had to do, and put a lot of memory toward it. But the sound engineer, John Kay, do the music and put together the samples. He said, "Hey, give me a list of categories with some examples." And so it was pretty straightforward. When you block a shot, I said, get that shit out of here. And with the razzle dazzle, if he does a spin move. And so I just kind of came up with these categories that I would support in code, and then a couple of examples. And we went into the studio, and it probably was 30 seconds in the first couple of categories where Tim Kitzrow just started ad-libbing, and had the great inflection and longer samples than I'd anticipated, and it just turned into magic, like, immediately. I still have the receipt someplace. I joke with Tim every once in a while. It was $650 we paid him to do this recording session, all the player names and these different categories, and it just it was cash box. It's great.
Is second to last question, was there anything you would have done, knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time, was there anything you'd do differently when developing or designing these arcade games?
That's a good one. The technology, there wasn't the technology to be doing anything online. I wouldn't have gone for more stats. We're maxing out the hardware. Well, yeah, of course. Probably the biggest amount of heat that I've had over the years is for CPU assistance, where basically there's a rubber banding system, and it manifests itself in probably 25 or 30 spots in the game. Like if you steal, you hit your steal button, then it's saying 1%, 1%, 1%. If you're John Stockton, it's 2%. You take a 3-pointer. If it's Shaq, it's 5%. If it's Stockton, again, it's 30%. So I had all these stats built in and all these percentages, but then I overlaid on top of it that rubber banding system. And so that rubber banding system was too obvious. Shaq goes from, his 2% make a 3-pointer to, all of a sudden a 20%, based on how far down he is. So the rubber banding system looked at the score differential between the two teams, and then it had new numbers for all these 25 or 30 categories. And while it certainly kept the games closer, which probably did us a favor in terms of having people feel like they were competitive, or tight games are more fun, it certainly hurt us from the standpoint of the perception that, hey, nothing matters, it's going to cheat anyway, because it was just too obvious. And so that's the thing I would change. I would improve the CPU assistance, system.
And my last question is, what are you working on right now? Like, what can you talk about what you're working on right now? Like, what are you doing over in Zynga?
I can. I actually have just released a game that I've been working very hard on for the last couple of years. It's called Harry Potter Puzzles and Spells. It's a match 3 game that has clubs and leagues and competition, earning trophies. And of course, the Harry Potter brand is amazing in terms of just the amount of content and the fun things that we can do. And so it's very much a live service, today's businesses, where you release something and then you keep going. And so that title just released in the last month and a half or so, and I'm very excited about it. It's it's a big hit for us already, and can't wait to see where we take it as a team moving forward. So that's my focus at Zynga.